Hey friends, it's Scott. I'm going to take a moment in the middle of the show here and thank our new sponsor, Tuple. I'm chatting with Johnny Marlar. Johnny, pair programming is kind of a niche thing, right? Like I know a lot of devs that don't pair much at all. Do you really think it's worth pair programming?
Yeah, I think even if you're the best programmer in the world, there's always something you can learn from other people. And, I think there's nothing like pairing that enables you to exchange like really technical expertise. For example, I'm really systems oriented. I have exhaustive error handling. I wrote my own X11 library because the error handling wasn't good enough. And my coworker Mikey, he's completely different. He's really an expert on Mac OS. He's a big Objective C fan. But because we've paired so much, we've slowly been able to build up expertise in each other's domains and styles. And he's taken some stuff from me and vice versa. It's been really good to have that regular pairing and exchange of ideas and information. So I think it's really hard to get that. And it's also hard to stay on the same page when you're not pairing with somebody. Instead of, trying to send comments to each other in a GitHub pull request and maybe arguing over something, being able to slow down and take that time and work on something real with somebody, there's just nothing that replaces it.
I think more people should try pairing. I did a lot of pairing in person, and the nearest thing you can do from pairing in person is using something like Tuple. You can check it out at tuple.app. It's the best remote pair programming app on both Mac OS and Windows. Friends, I'm Scott Hanselman. It's another episode of Hansel Minutes, and today I'm chatting with Claire Giordano. How are you?
I'm good. Super excited to be here.
I'm glad. You work on Postgres, an open source database, and you do this for Microsoft. And it's unusual, of course, that you're working at open source at Microsoft. People, when I tell them I'm working on open source at Microsoft, they're kind of shocked and surprised. How long have you been in the Postgres community?
Since 2017.
Okay,
It's been a minute.
It'll be like 10 years at some point. But Postgres, am I saying it correctly? Because I've heard Postgres SQL, PostgreSQL. What's the right way to say this?
Just say Postgres, and that keeps it simple. But yes, okay. when you spell it with the full official name, there is a QL tagged on to the very end of it.
Okay, so Postgres is the way to do it. Postgres has been around since 1986. When did you discover Postgres?
I discovered Postgres when I first joined the Citus open source team, which was a small San Francisco-based startup in 2017. And Citus is an extension to Postgres, so that's kind of how I got my start. And in the beginning, I was focused almost completely on the Citus extension, and then over time, after Microsoft acquired the company, I became more and more involved with the Postgres core. And that's what I spend my days on now.
So Citus was an extension, an open source extension to Postgres that made it more distributed, right? It basically allowed you to scale it out horizontally. Exactly. But it's not a fork. It's not a copy or a fork of Postgres. It was literally done as an extension, which I think is surprising.
Well, one of the things that I came to learn is that in the very first design document authored by Michael Stonebreaker and Lawrence Rowe back in like the 1986 timeframe, called The Design of Postgres, the second design objective on there was the extensibility of Postgres in terms of data types and access methods and things like that. And so what I think is so cool is that part of what has made this ecosystem so big and has made the database so popular with developers is the extensibility. And it's just, I don't know, it was a very smart design decision back in the day.
Yeah, it truly was. I grew up doing SQL Server, and there's this theory. Someone told me that you can tell if you're like a secret Microsoftie because Microsofties say SQL and open source people say SQL. Is that true?
I don't know if that's true. I have heard everything pronounced 6 ways to Sunday. In fact, I even made a 1-minute video skit at one point making fun of all the different ways to spell and pronounce Postgres. So there's a famous email that was sent probably in the 2006, 2007 timeframe from Tom Lane, who's a very famous Postgres contributor and committer and engineer, where he talked about how maybe one of the worst decisions of the Postgres project was the name of it, because it does get mispronounced and it does easily get misspelled, but it's too late to change it now.
I think every good, successful open source project has to have confusion about how to do the name, whether it be Nginx or Kubernetes or whatever. There was an old meme where someone pronounced Kubernetes as cyber noodles, and they just basically gave up in the early days.
I
So
have not heard that one.
Yeah. So I was doing Microsoft SQL Server back in the early 90s, like on Windows NT. And Postgres, I don't think I even heard about Postgres until about 10 years ago. When I started studying, though, this is a 40-year-old project, but somehow there's a freshness to it. That surprises me. What do you think makes it feel fresh right now?
That is a really hard question to answer. I was at a conference last week in Latvia, of all places. It's the annual European Postgres conference that moves around to different countries and cities every year. And I was walking the hallway and talking to people because I knew I was going to be on the show, right? And I wanted to not just represent what Claire thinks, but harness the ideas and perspectives of others. And I was asking them this question about why is it so popular? And of course I got a lot of different answers. So I think there are many reasons. Just like if you ever study a car accident, this is changing something positive to something negative. There's often multiple factors that lead up to the accident. And so in many ways, this is a happy accident that Postgres is in such a good place, but there are different factors. Where do you want to start?
Well, I was thinking, when I think about open source SQL, I think about Postgres, I think about MySQL or MySQL, and I think about SQLite. But Postgres is the first among equals. It's so much more. It's more standards compliant. It's got better scalability. Like, with all due respect to the MySQLs and the SQLites, they almost feel like toys compared to Postgres. So I feel like Postgres is one of the slow and steady wins the race. Like, just grind it out, focus on standards compliance, focus on really good quality enterprise use cases, and then it is an overnight success in 40 years. That's my theory.
It's a good theory and it works. Let's add to it. Let's pile on some other aspects. Obviously, Postgres is open source. So people know that. And it has a very permissive license, which means it's okay to fork it. It's okay to pretty much do anything. The license is called the PostgreSQL license, but you can think of it as similar to MIT or similar to BST, just very liberal in terms of what you can do. And as a result, it means a lot of universities use it. A lot of people learn it in college. It's very easy to get started with it and kick the tires as a developer. And so I think the openness of it has definitely contributed to the expertise that people have when they're interested in data and when they're interested in analyzing data. What else? It helps. It helps that Postgres doesn't belong to any one company.
That was my next question. I was like, what's the giant company that owns it?
Yeah, there is no giant company. Microsoft has a whole bunch of people on salary who work on the upstream Postgres open source project. In addition, we have our Azure database for Postgres offering that that's a managed service that customers use. But people like me and the developers who work on it, we're focused on the open source project, but we're not the only company, right? EDB, Amazon, a lot of smaller companies, even Google, have people who contribute to this project. And the collaboration is global. It's across so many different countries and continents. And there's a lot of commercial interests involved, but no one single company behind it. Some people call it sometimes the people's database because of that fact that the interests in it are so distributed.
That makes me feel like its success is the fact that it never got purchased.
Well, it certainly never got bought by Oracle. And so
nobody wants that.
Helpful.
Nobody wants that.
It's also was helpful. I was looking up the years. Let me go find them. Heroku went all in on a Postgres offering as a managed service back in 2007. And
Mm.
then Amazon launched RDS Postgres, which is the managed service for Postgres, in 2013. Azure came out with our managed Postgres offering in 2017. But if you go back to kind of Heroku and Amazon, they were almost like trendsetters in this space. They really commercialized access to people who wanted the managed service experience with it, and helped to make it popular too.
Yeah, and made it cloud scale, because I know that like in that early 2000s, making Postgres enterprise ready and doing things like performance and table spaces and point in time recovery, these were all things that were like important check boxes in order to make sure that this was going to be a real alternative to an Oracle or to an SQL server.
And then if you go back to the 90s, I don't know if it was the early 2000s or the late 90s, but when Oracle came out with their multi-core licensing, right, that definitely made Oracle more expensive, which did prod some people to want to look for a relational database that was more affordable, but still could meet all the requirements. And then you said web scale. That brings
Yeah.
up the idea of NoSQL, right? And that
Yeah.
wonderful cartoon that came out years ago. But Postgres added support for JSON and JSON-B too along the way. I think that was like 2012. And that, I think, was also a watershed moment in helping popularize Postgres, because it meant you could have this ability to create schemas that were more flexible, in addition to having all of the benefits of relational. And you could do that in one database. And JSON support was added first, and then JSON-B, right, the binary object notation support came in probably a couple releases later. So there were all these different watershed moments that kind of added together, and the community just got stronger and stronger.
Well, and those little features are the ones like JSON showed up just when we needed it, right? And Cloud Scale showed up just when we needed it. So it was there quietly improving itself, and then it was ready to go. By the way, I did a little bit of research. You probably know this, but tell me if you do or not. So Michael Stonebreaker, who is now in his early 80s, is the computer scientist that worked on a database that was called Ingress, Interactive Graphics and Retrieval System, in 1973. Yep. Postgres is literally their post-Ingress project.
Correct.
That's so funny. There's always a recursive acronym behind every great open source project. There's always some 50-year-old story about what it stands for, and now we've all forgotten it, and we just say Postgres and smush it all together. He must think that's hilarious.
About 10 years later, after it had been called Postgres for 10 years, SQL support was added, and there was a decision to change the name to add, to have it be PostgreSQL, and which was a good decision in many ways, but has led to all sorts of mispronunciation and misspellings and other challenges. So, and what was the joke you were telling me that has been told a million times before, right before we started the recording? There's two classic problems in computer science, and the first is naming, right?
Yeah, and the other ones are, I think, scale and off by one errors.
Exactly. There you go. Dun, dun.
Yeah. Hey friends, this is Scott. I want to take a moment and thank our new sponsor, Postman. When I think about APIs, I think about Postman. I was chatting with Roderick about how he's leveraging APIs to build agents. What benefits have you seen in building agents?
Thanks, Scott. We've seen a lot of internal benefits. We've been actually prototyping and deploying into production agents built with Postman flows inside of Postman across functions. A lot of them are developer or operations oriented, things that help us, for example, summarize our Slack conversations into Jira tickets, or that automate our on-call processes. But also in our marketing team, and our sales team, our customer service teams have all deployed agents that help them cut down on a lot of chores and manual tasks that they do. The transformative power really comes from being able to connect an API that's AI ready to AI. And Postman is a great place to do that. We have 100,000 plus APIs on the Postman API network, thousands of potentially ready to use APIs that you can compose into your agents right off the bat. And the transformative power of agents is they do the work for you. You don't have to sit there and do all the things manually and check them. They can just go off, ask you when they need input, but otherwise they accomplish tasks and warp time. It just increases your efficiency overall.
AI agents are supposed to do the toil and the work that's not fun so that you can do the fun stuff. Postman Flows lets you orchestrate APIs, logic, data visually to make those agents, and you can learn more at postman.com/Hansel Minutes. So we have we're in the mid 2000s. We're developing a product that is open source. It's owned by no one. It is based on good, solid computer science. It's also based on standards. It seems like there's a very much a focus of like whatever we're doing, we're going to make sure that we're very close to the full SQL standard, and we have compliance. MySQL, SQLite, other databases have partial and basic compliance. And then also, like you said, a friendly license. But Postgres is also known for its welcoming community. And that's probably not something that they built in the 70s and 80s. Like, was it welcoming when you got there, or is that a conscious thing to always make sure that the Postgres community has chill vibes?
So I can't speak to before I got there, but I can say that when I arrived on scene in 2017 and later, it is a very welcoming community. Last week, there were probably 680 of us in Latvia, many of whom are users who travel from other parts of Europe or other parts of the world to come and learn more about the latest capabilities of the release, but many of whom were contributors and community members who were also in the hallways, talking about the next release and, trying to solve problems and figure out how to collaborate. And I have personally always found it welcoming, and those who I know bend over backwards to try to figure out how do we, grow new contributors, grow new community members, if you will. And how we do that, I don't know. I mean, there's code of conducts, obviously, that people take very seriously at these in-person conferences. There's also a lot of transparency in the open source projects. So we use something that's a little bit old school, which are mailing lists. And there's a lot of collaboration that happens on the Postgres mailing list. And if you're listening to the show, you can go read what the committers and the contributors are saying to each other. There's a
So it's not on Discord. It's not in Slack. It's not on.
Well, there is a Postgres Slack. It has 24,000 members, most of whom are users and who are asking, technical questions, similar to on Stack Overflow, where there's a lot of Q&A about the project. There is a Postgres Hackers Discord that was created last year to support a mentoring program that was instantiated last year for up-and-coming contributors. But yes, the majority of conversation, particularly amongst the hackers community, and I don't mean hackers in terms of like these security. We use the term hackers in Postgres to mean Postgres developers who work on the database. Mm-hmm. As distinguished from Postgres developers who are like application developers who run on the database. So, there's different levels or focus areas for developers. Mm-hmm. Anyway, But
the decisions, it sounds like, make happen, the governance, the consensus-driven community is happening really on those mailing lists.
Yes. And one other thing that distinguishes Postgres from other databases that might have a single company behind them is there is no top-down roadmap that gets created for each new release, for example. It's all very bottoms up, and people work on what they think is important based on their interactions with users, based on what they're learning online, and also based on what they can convince other people to collaborate with them on. There's this annual conference that happens in Canada every year. It's now called PGConf Dev, and it'll happen again next May. It'll be Vancouver this time. And a lot of the committers and contributors go to that event, and that's where the collaboration starts for the next release.
So if someone were to have an idea, they would go into the mailing list, they'd express their idea, and the idea would make its way all the way to a major version over some period of time based entirely on the strength of that idea. They would not be able to push that through and get it all the way out if everyone was not excited about that new feature.
Yeah, you don't have to convince everyone to get something in, but you have to convince enough people. There are 31 committers in the Postgres project today. That number will probably change again next spring when new people are invited to become committers. But committers are people who have that commitment, who are actually, in a lot of other open source projects, they might be called maintainers. So certainly, if you're authoring some new update to the code, you do have to find a committer who's willing to commit it. And, that's a big commitment on their part. Sorry for the pun. Because, once it's in, the committer oftentimes has to be the one to deal with any possible reverts or updates or immediate fixes or whatever. And, often those aren't needed, but sometimes they are. And so they're signing up to be partnered with you to maintain it moving forward.
That's pretty cool, and it must be interesting to manage the desires of communities versus the desire of the companies that pay the salaries. Like you're a Postgres team member, but you also work at Microsoft, and there might be an Amazon person who, like, their boss might say, "Hey, go and try to get that into Postgres." They've still got to convince the community, and otherwise, it's an extension or it's an add-on. And you would not want to destabilize the product. And Postgres, if I may, has kind of a reputation for being somewhat conservative in adding new features. They're not going to add something if they don't think it's going to be helpful and everyone's going to appreciate it.
One of the exciting new things that has just been added to Postgres 18, which might not sound new to you if you're coming from another database or another project, but asynchronous I/O support for reads has just been added to Postgres 18, and that's been years in the making. In fact, I'm excited to be here on your podcast, but I host a monthly podcast as well called Talking Postgres, little minor plug there. And recently I had Andres Freund on as a guest, and it was really cool. It wasn't about asynchronous IO, like here's how you use it, or here are the capabilities that new feature gives you. But it was instead, Andres, by the way, is a committer and a partner engineer who works at Microsoft, but he's also works on the open source project first and foremost, and is a member of the core team. And he was reflecting on what went wrong and what went right with that project, because it was a 5-year long project leading up to this point in Postgres 18. And,
wow, 5 years.
Yeah. With, peaks and valleys and ups and downs, and also like a number of contributions into the previous releases that planted the seeds so that this could go live in Postgres 18.
That's a great point. I don't think people realize that in order to do a big thing, you have to lay the groundwork. Like I know, like we're on .NET 10 right now, and there are things that were put in .NET 6 and 7 that are getting ready to support features coming in .NET 10. So the team's master plan to get async 5 years ago and putting features in and making sure that they're stable and getting them ready for Postgres 18, I'm sure was a very long process.
Well, and that part of being an architect is one that I feel like nobody teaches you when you're younger, right? When you're a junior engineer, but it's a really important part to figure out how to carve things up and lay them out. And also, you can't put things into a release that don't get used. There has to be a user for those new capabilities, and so yeah, it was very exciting.
I have looked around to see if there was any drama, because sometimes communities and open source communities have drama. And the only real drama that I could find within Postgres was someone tried to trademark Postgres, and the PostgreSQL core team pushed back on that and was like, no, you can't do that. That was a sloppy and foolish thing to do. Do you remember that? That was a couple of years ago.
I do remember that. And I probably know more about that than I should, because about a year and a half ago, I became a board member for this entity called PGCA, Postgres Community Association. And we shepherd the trademarks for Postgres. So that's the names, Postgres and PostgreSQL, both of them, both spellings, as well as Slonic, which is the elephant logo or icon, if you will, that is the, visually communicates that this is Postgres. So we protect the trademarks and domain names for all of those things. And part of what I've been trying to do, and I did not plant the seed with Scott, just so you know. I don't even think he knew that I'm a board member
No, I
for
didn't know. I'm
PGCN.
learning this now. I was just doing research. I've got about 48 tabs open right now.
So one of the things, though, that as a board member now that I try to do is raise people's awareness that there is a Postgres trademark. And so if you're about to name something, maybe you created some new service or feature, you want to use Postgres in the name, go read the trademark policy and make sure that what you're doing is in compliance with it. And if not, there's an address there. You can reach out to the board and ask questions, because we do need to protect it. You don't want someone to go call something that isn't affiliated with a project at all and go call it Postgres and confuse the user community. So even though it's open source, it's not open trademark season, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one for people to understand, that like you don't want to have anyone use the logo, anyone use the name. We have the same issues with community conferences with .NET or with Microsoft. It's squishy because there's always some big company with money that wants to do the thing, but ultimately, if it's an open source project, it has to be owned by the people, and the trademarks and the marks, the service marks and the icons need to be centrally managed.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that drama, it seems like it has just continued to explode in popularity. People keep getting excited about it. It is both lightweight, that you can run it in a container on your computer, and it is enterprise ready and can be sharded and run in the cloud. You mentioned that Azure has a Postgres cloud scale effectively. Is that literally just Postgres running in Azure, or did Azure have to write certain herbs and spices and sprinkle it to make it Azure-y or cloud ready?
Herbs and spices. So the Azure database for Postgres managed service is Postgres open source, plus all of the things that come with Azure that make it a managed service. So all of those additional features and capabilities that help you with backups, help you get high availability, help you monitor your system on Azure. So the Azure bits are not open source, but the core Postgres that's part of that managed service is truly Postgres. And one of the things my boss was super excited about is that we've been trying on the Azure team to get better and better at supporting like the latest and greatest Postgres releases. And the team was just super stoked to get Postgres 18 support out. Albeit in one region, but the region support will roll
rolls
out over
across
time.
multiple regions,
right?
Yeah.
In preview on the day that Postgres 18 open source GA'd. So that was kind of exciting for our team, because if you go back a couple of releases, that was not the case. So we the Azure team just keeps getting better, which is cool.
That is really challenging to get a day one release. You announce it and you say, and you can have it live right now. To be able to do that, the amount of coordination, because I've seen the behind the scenes on projects like that, is non-trivial. And you really have to be embedded with, you have to be really involved in the community to be watching those, taking the builds and managing all of that. Speaking of the builds, where does it build? Is this all in GitHub? Is this building in Actions? Is it building on Postgres own build servers? Where do the binaries come from? Because it's probably not on Claire's laptop.
No, it's not. Okay, so one of the things that the Postgres project, the open source project, is famous for is not wanting to depend on any commercial vendors. So, for example, the source code for Postgres is not on GitHub. There's a mirror that's available on GitHub that's kept up to date, but it runs using Git on servers that are maintained by a sysadmin team that is part of the Postgres open source project. And that's about 7 or 8 people, I believe. And they don't just manage the Git servers, they also manage the servers that host the mailing lists. They also have to deal with hosting email as well, because all of the Postgres committers, they all have an @postgresql.org email address, for example. There are commercial sponsors for all of these servers that people run, like from Canova and Rackspace and AWS, and I'm probably forgetting somebody else. So that's helpful. But there are people who carry pagers that maintain all of these servers that the project runs on. In terms of your question about build, Postgres has a build farm, and there's a committer named Andrew Dunstan who is like the face of the build farm. And all of the servers on the build farm are called animals because it's a farm, I guess. And there are over 200 different animals in the build farm. And I gave a talk last week at PGConf EU that was about all of the contributions, or as many as I could track down, with a teammate of mine, Daniel Gustafson, who's also a committer, that went into Postgres 18. And so I happen to have a little factoid, which is that over the course of the development of Postgres 18, which is like a 15-month long period, start to finish, over 229 million seconds worth of time was spent building variations of the Postgres 18 release. I don't know if that's interesting.
That is amazing. Another factoid that I was shocked about is how many builds there are. There's dozens, right? There's Windows installers, there's Mac installers, there's Docker images, there's ARM builds for your Raspberry Pi. There's, every Linux distribution can ship their own version of it. So there's one canonical Postgres for you, but the ecosystem is making literally dozens of builds for different platforms, and it works everywhere, which is crazy.
And there are people who are seriously dedicated to creating the packages across all of these operating systems, both on the developer side. Like I know when Thomas Monroe on our team is involved in a lot of the operating system support, but on the packaging side, there's an engineer named Christoph Berg and an engineer named Devrim Gunduz, neither of whom work for Microsoft, but they take packaging of Postgres seriously. Devrim manages RPM and Christoph is more on the Debian side of things. And yeah, there's a lot of attention to detail there. And it's not just core Postgres either. All those extensions that I talked about earlier, those all have to get built and released with the new versions. It's a global effort. And I did not expect when I joined Citus in 2017, I just had no idea how Postgres would change my life. So I love what I do on this project, and it's really fun.
So you joined Citus, and Citus got acquired, and that's how you made your way to Microsoft?
Yeah. Citus got acquired almost about 2 years after I joined the company. And then after I'd been at Microsoft for a couple of years, my scope broadened to focus even more on Postgres core.
When it got acquired, were you like, here we go, big giant company?
Okay, so this is really interesting. I had several people reach out to me, text, phone call, whatever, probably more text these days than phone call, and say, you know what? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, Claire, I'm so sorry. How can I help you find a new job? And they said, but you know what? Right now, congratulations. This is really cool. So it was interesting to me as someone who'd been in the industry for longer than I care to admit, that the perception of Microsoft had changed so much in the 10 years leading up to our acquisition in 2019. You've been at Microsoft a long time, so you must have experienced that.
Yeah, there's I've been here now 17, 18 years, which I think is both a long time, but it's kind of like slightly more than half of my career. So I still remember what it was like on the outside, and I try to make sure I remember. But there was definitely a Borg evil empire, and we kind of turned things around with the work that we've done in open source. We just need to make sure that we maintain that level of quality and don't slip back into naughty ways that we may have been known for in the early 90s.
Yeah, for me, what I love is that my leadership is, my boss and the engineering VP, who's his peer, they're both just super supportive of our Postgres open source team and what we do. And you said something interesting earlier. You said when there's a commercial cloud company that wants its contributors to go work on X, it's not really like that, right? First of all, even if somebody as an engineering leader wanted their Postgres open source contributors to go do something, it's not like they necessarily can, right? They have to lobby for support. They have to get support across company lines and across countries. So yes, it is true that there are quite a number of contributors who focus on the needs of hyperscalers, but that's because people need that, right? And it's more about what the end users of Postgres need than anything else. That's my belief.
That's great. And I think that is a good belief to have. And I think that we do see it. I literally put Postgres on my Raspberry Pi yesterday, and it was like sudo apt install PostgreSQL. It was like that easy. And I couldn't believe that this giant hyperscaler level database that runs half the world is now running on like a pocket-sized ARM device and can run everywhere in between. And folks can go and learn more about this at postgresql.org, postgresql.org. You can see right there on the homepage, PostgreSQL 18 released. You can learn more about the community and some of the great conferences and user groups that are going on. And thank you so much, Claire Giordano, for hanging out with me today.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. This has been fun.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.